A series of major events happened in India recently that most of the world reported as separate events. But all of them point to the same conclusion, that India is quietly walking away from a system that has controlled global trade for 80 years. When you put these events together, what you see is not a country trying to rise above the rest. What you see is a country that has already risen and is now making decisions from a position of strength. We will go through these events one by one, and by the end, you will see what they are all pointing toward. On June 10th and June 11th, 2026, India conducted 3 flight tests. The tests were classified at the time. The country found out about them on June 12th and 13th, when the information was released by the government. What India had tested was its multi-layer ballistic missile defense system. And what those tests proved changed where India sits in the world permanently. Only a handful of countries possess the ability to intercept and destroy a ballistic missile in flight using their own domestically developed technology, not a system bought from another country, not a system deployed by an ally. Their own, built by their own scientists and engineers from their own research. The list is short. The United States, Russia, China, Israel, and now India. This is not a small achievement. This is an entrance into one of the most exclusive security clubs in the world, a club that no country joins by accident and no country joins quickly. To understand why this matters, consider what happened across the Middle East. Iranian ballistic missiles fell on Kuwait, on Bahrain, on Saudi Arabia, countries that had spent decades accumulating enormous wealth, building infrastructure, purchasing Western weapon systems. And in the end, they could not stop an incoming missile fired from 1,000 kilometers away. The citizens of those countries felt what it means to live in a country that cannot protect itself from a ballistic missile strike. Not from a soldier on a border, not from a fighter jet in the sky, from a missile launched from the territory of another country that arrives before any human reaction is possible. India watched all of this. India had been working on the answer since 1999, the year after Pakistan conducted its first nuclear tests, and India understood what the future might hold. For 27 years, India's Defense Research and Development Organization worked on a system that could intercept a ballistic missile not just inside the atmosphere but above it. In the exo-atmospheric layer, above the Kármán line at the edge of space, where an interceptor must find and destroy a warhead traveling at speeds that human beings cannot fully comprehend. The tests in June 2026 validated both layers. Endo-atmospheric, inside the Earth's atmosphere. Exo-atmospheric, above it. Multi-layer means that even if one intercept fails, a second attempt can be made from a different altitude, a different geometry, a different approach. The second phase of India's ballistic missile defense program is now complete. Alongside the BMD tests, India also tested the naval anti-ship missile, medium range, designated NASM-MR. The logic is the same. An adversary does not always launch from a fixed site on land. An adversary can send a warship close to India's coast and fire from the sea. The NASM-MR is India's answer to that specific threat, and it was tested in the same week as the BMD as part of the same demonstration of comprehensive defensive capability. Iran has been studying these tests very carefully. Every major Iranian news outlet covered the story. The reason is not difficult to understand. Iran experienced what India is now protected against. Their country absorbed a wave of strikes that their air defense systems could not fully stop. When the ceasefire eventually comes, Iran's obsession for the next decade will be building the kind of layered defense that India just demonstrated. They are watching India's tests the way a student watches a masterclass. But Iran's reaction is not what matters most to India. Iran is studying what India built. China is trying to figure out how to defeat it. Every time India has conducted a missile defense test, a Chinese naval intelligence ship has appeared in the Bay of Bengal. China's official explanation is ocean research, but the timing is never a coincidence. The ship appears when India launches, monitors the trajectory, and leaves when the test is over. China is not watching out of curiosity. China is watching because it needs to know whether the ballistic missiles it could one day fire toward India can still get through. The test conducted on June 10th and 11th gave China an answer it did not want. India's sky is no longer open. India spent 27 years building this. In just 1 week in June 2026, India proved it works. This is India building its own shield. But something else is also happening at the same time. As India is getting stronger, powerful countries are quietly coming closer to India. Not because they have to, but because they want to. France is the clearest example of this. Donald Trump was at the G7 summit in Nice. He dominated the headlines as he always does, but the most significant meeting of that summit was not about Trump, it was about India. French President Emmanuel Macron personally invited Prime Minister Narendra Modi to the G7, not as a symbolic gesture of inclusion, not as a diplomatic courtesy to a large country, but as a strategic partner that France considers central to its own future. French officials had been saying clearly in the weeks before the summit that India was a strategic priority. The summit was held in Nice, the city on France's Mediterranean coast, the capital of the Alps Maritimes Department, the city that has hosted European royalty and global artists for centuries. And in June 2026, it hosted the first Bharat Innovates event ever held outside India. 120 Indian and French startups, the best of India's technology ecosystem brought to the south of France to meet the best of the French innovation economy, to find partnerships, to attract investment, to build the commercial relationships that governments sign into existence, but that entrepreneurs actually make real. Macron said at the opening of Bharat Innovates what many European leaders have been slow to say, but what the data has been showing for years. The question is not whether India is innovating. The question is who is going to innovate with India. France's answer is, they will. France has been the most consistent Western partner India has had over the past few decades. When India conducted the Pokhran nuclear tests in 1998 and most of the Western world was preparing sanctions, France did not join the consensus of condemnation. Tension to India before it was strategically obvious to pay attention. The relationship has deepened dramatically since. Mirage fighters, Rafale jets, Scorpion submarines. India purchased all of these from France, not just as a buyer-seller transaction, but as a partnership that included technology transfer, co-production agreements, and the kind of industrial collaboration that France does not offer casually. The bilateral trade between the two countries has more than doubled over the past decade, now sitting at nearly $16 billion. And in 2026, France and India concluded a free trade agreement with the European Union, a deal that opens the European market to Indian goods and services in ways that will take years to fully manifest, but that represents a fundamental shift in the economic relationship between India and the continent. At the G7, the agenda between Modi and Macron covered defense, nuclear energy, artificial intelligence, space, and the Indo-Pacific. On nuclear energy, the long-pending Jaishankar nuclear power project in Maharashtra moved closer to reality. Jaishankar, if fully implemented, would become one of the largest nuclear power projects in the world. For India, it means energy security. For France, it means the most important demonstration of French nuclear technology at scale anywhere on the planet. France's nuclear technology is the most advanced in the civilian energy sector. India's energy needs are enormous and growing. The Shanti Act, India's Sustainable Harnessing and Advancement of Nuclear Energy for Transforming India Act, had recently passed, opening the legal framework for Indian and foreign private players to collaborate on small modular reactors and advanced modular reactors. On artificial intelligence, France and India co-chaired the Global AI Summit in January 2025. Both countries share a position that is distinct from the dominant American approach. They believe in open, cooperative, multilingual AI that does not become a tool of geopolitical control. France has built Mistral AI, the only European large language model capable of competing with Chinese and American systems at the frontier. India has a pool of AI talent and a data ecosystem of extraordinary scale. The combination of French frontier model development and Indian data, talent, and deployment capability is one of the most underappreciated technology partnerships on Earth. And in the background of all of this is the Indo-Pacific. France is not just a European power. France has territories in the Indian Ocean, the Pacific, and the Caribbean. France maintains naval and military presence across the Indo-Pacific that gives it equities in regional security that most European countries simply do not have. India and France share an interest in a free and open Indo-Pacific that is not dominated by any single power. That shared interest is becoming more concrete as China's naval expansion and assertive behavior makes the abstract principles of freedom of navigation into daily operational realities. When Macron said India is a strategic priority for France, he was not making a speech. He was describing a calculation that France had already made, a relationship it had already invested in, and a bet on the future that the past 30 years of data fully supports. France is not the only European country moving toward India, but France is the furthest along, and the G7 in Nice was the most public statement yet of where that relationship is headed. And while Modi was in Nice, something was happening on a tarmac back home that told exactly the same story, from a completely different direction. On June 10, 2026, the same day India began conducting its ballistic missile defense tests, a different kind of milestone was reached on a tarmac in Vadodara, Gujarat. The first made-in-India C-295 military transport aircraft completed its maiden test flight. The C-295 is a tactical transport aircraft. It is not a fighter jet. It does not carry missiles. It carries troops. It carries cargo. It carries the things armies need to function: ammunition, food, medical supplies, equipment. It takes off from short runways and unprepared airstrips. It operates at high altitude. And for the Indian Air Force, which has an enormous logistical challenge across the Himalayas, the Andaman Islands, and the northeastern border with China, a transport aircraft that can operate from difficult terrain is not a luxury. It is a necessity. For decades, the Indian Air Force had been operating the Avro 748 fleet for this role. Those aircraft were aging. India needed a replacement. The deal for 56 C-295 aircraft was signed, 16 to be supplied from Spain in flyaway condition, and 40 to be assembled in India. The assembly facility is a partnership between Tata Advanced Systems Limited and Airbus, located in Vadodara. Prime Minister Modi had inaugurated the facility in October 2024 alongside his Spanish counterpart. The maiden test flight of the first aircraft assembled in that facility happened on June 10, 2026. This is what Make in India actually looks like. A complex, precision-engineered military aircraft assembled in India, lifting off from Indian soil for the first time. An aircraft that can carry 70 troops in high-density configuration, or 50 fully equipped paratroopers for airdrop missions, or 9.5 tons of cargo across a 5,000-kilometer range with more than 11 hours of endurance. An aircraft that can take off and land from a runway of 670 meters or less, which matters enormously for the forward airstrips in Ladakh, in Arunachal Pradesh, in the Andaman and Nicobar Islands, in every difficult geography where India needs to project force or sustain a deployed force. The Indian versions of the C-295 will carry an indigenous electronic warfare suite, not a foreign system bolted on, an Indian-designed, Indian-manufactured self-protection system integrated into an aircraft assembled in an Indian factory. This is the accumulation of decades of capability building: the aircraft, the electronics, the assembly process, the testing protocol, all of it done in India. There are 56 aircraft in the order. 40 will be assembled in India. The facility in Vadodara is not just building these 40 aircraft. It is building the industrial knowledge, the skilled workforce, the supply chain, and the institutional capability to build larger aircraft in the future. The C-295 is the gateway. The next step is larger. The step after that is larger still. India has the ambition and now has the proof that the ambition is executable. India has been told for generations that it cannot build things of this complexity, that it must buy, not make, that manufacturing at this level of sophistication is beyond what India is capable of. The C-295's maiden flight on June 10, 2026 is a quiet, definitive answer to every version of that argument. The next event has nothing to do with missiles or aircraft, just money, and what India is quietly doing with it. For 80 years, the world has traded in American dollars. Oil is priced in dollars. International shipping contracts are settled in dollars. Central bank reserves are held in dollars. The dollar's dominance is not incidental. It is structural. It is the result of decisions made in Bretton Woods in 1944, reinforced by the petrodollar agreements of the 1970s, and maintained by the sheer scale and depth of American financial markets. Countries that want to trade internationally need dollars. Countries that need dollars need access to the American financial system. And countries that need access to the American financial system have to operate within the rules that the American government sets. India has been watching this architecture carefully, and India is now, methodically, quietly, building an alternative. The India-UAE local currency trade arrangement is the clearest example. India exports medicines, food products, machinery, steel, and manufactured goods to the UAE. India imports crude oil from the UAE. Under the arrangement that India and the UAE have structured, the UAE earns rupees when India buys its oil. Those rupees are then used to purchase Indian exports, the medicines, the food, the machinery, a self-sustaining trade cycle, a loop that does not require a single dollar to function. India does not need to acquire dollars to buy oil. The UAE does not need to convert to dollars to buy Indian goods. The transaction happens in local currency at lower cost, with less exposure to American financial policy. The UAE does not need to convert to dollars to buy Indian goods. The transaction happens in local currency at lower cost, with less exposure to American financial policy. The UAE is not the only country. India has been building similar arrangements across Asia, Africa, and the Gulf. The Unified Payments Interface, UPI, is already operational in Singapore, Mauritius, Nepal, Bhutan, France, the UAE, Sri Lanka, and several other countries. It is expanding. The vision is not to destroy the dollar. The vision is to not need the dollar for every transaction, to have enough of India's trade conducted in local currencies and enough of India's payment infrastructure embedded in other countries' systems, that American financial sanctions become less effective as a tool against India. This matters because of what happened during Operation Sindoor. The United States did not impose financial sanctions on India during or after the operation, but the threat existed. The infrastructure for such sanctions exists. American officials have used financial access as a coercive tool against countries that made choices Washington did not approve of. India is building a hedge against that coercive capacity, not by confronting America, but by reducing the leverage that dollar dependency creates. The UAE is also investing billions of dollars into India, into sectors that will supply the UAE with the goods it needs, from the Indian industry that is growing to produce them. This is not aid. This is not charity. This is a two-country bet on mutual growth. India produces what the UAE needs. The UAE invests in India's capacity to produce more. The loop reinforces itself. The dollar sits outside it. If this model scales, and India is working to scale it, the implications are enormous. Indian exports become cheaper because there is no dollar conversion cost. The rupee becomes accepted in more and more markets, not because of government decree, but because of commercial reality. India's economic sovereignty deepens, and the leverage that any country can exercise over India through financial systems diminishes, year by year, transaction by transaction. This is strategy, not politics, not nationalism, strategy. This strategy is only one side of power. The other side is what the world saw in May 2025, and what it is still reacting to even now. Operation Sindoor happened in May 2025. India struck terrorist infrastructure inside Pakistan. The Indian Air Force used BrahMos missiles and Scalp missiles to hit 11 Pakistani air bases. The Indian Army and Navy demonstrated integration of systems in real combat. Pakistan's Chinese-origin air defense systems were overcome. The world watched. What happened after Sindoor is what nobody fully anticipated. The world did not just watch. The world took notes. And then the world started calling New Delhi. By the end of 2025, India's defense exports reached $4 billion, up from $2.76 billion the year before. Vietnam sealed a BrahMos deal. Indonesia is next. The Philippines has already signed. Cyprus is in discussions. Greece is asking questions. Over 80 countries have made inquiries about Indian military technology. Not because India ran a marketing campaign, because Indian weapons were used in real combat against a real adversary's Chinese-origin air defenses. And they worked. In June 2026, Turkish media erupted when reports emerged that Greece was in talks with India about the long-range land attack cruise missile, the LRL-ACM, known as the Nirbhay. The missile is developed entirely in India by the DRDO. It is subsonic, terrain-hugging, and flies at low altitude to avoid radar detection. Its range is 1,500 kilometers. Its precision is under 10 meters, and it is powered by the Indigenous Manic turbofan engine. It has drawn comparisons to the United States Tomahawk and Russia's Kaliber. Turkey understood immediately what this meant. If Greece acquires the Nirbhay, Istanbul comes within range. Turkish air bases, Turkish radar installations, Turkish command centers. The entire military balance in the Eastern Mediterranean shifts. Turkey's so-called Blue Homeland Doctrine, its policy of expanding naval jurisdiction across the Aegean and Eastern Mediterranean, becomes vastly more complicated when the country across the water can suddenly strike 1,500 kilometers with precision. Turkish media described it as alarm. Turkish defense analysts said it would fundamentally change the balance of power in the region. Erdogan's own foreign minister made an appeal to India. Please do not arm our rivals. But why is India arming Turkey's rivals? The answer is not complicated. During Operation Sindoor, Turkey sent Bayraktar drones and loitering munitions to Pakistan. Turkey supplied weapons to a country that was at war with India. When Turkey made that choice, it made its position clear. India made a note. And India's response has not been a diplomatic protest or a strongly worded letter. India's response has been to arm everyone Turkey considers a rival: Greece, Cyprus, Armenia, systematically, professionally, and at a price that Western suppliers cannot match. Cyprus is reportedly set to become the fourth country in the world to purchase the BrahMos supersonic missile after the Philippines, Vietnam, and Indonesia. A BrahMos-equipped Cyprus means no Turkish warship can approach the island without entering the missile's kill zone. That is not a symbolic statement. That is a permanent shift in the security reality of the Eastern Mediterranean. India's rise as a defense exporter is not a side story. It is central to India's strategic position. Every country that carries an Indian weapons system is a country with a strategic interest in India remaining strong and reliable. Every BrahMos sold is a relationship. Every Nirbhay proposal is a conversation. Every Akash system deployed is a partner. India is building an ecosystem of defense relationships that no sanction, no Western pressure, no diplomatic campaign can easily undo, because the relationships are built on need, on proven performance, and on mutual benefit. This is what Operation Sindoor built, not just a military victory, a strategic reputation. In the span of just a few weeks, India proved that it can intercept an intercontinental ballistic missile. It proved that it can manufacture a military aircraft domestically. It deepened the most important bilateral relationship in Europe. It moved one step further toward a trade architecture that does not require American permission to function. These are not coincidences. They are the output of a country that has been building, decade by decade, toward a moment when it can act from strength rather than from need. India remains firmly on track to become the third largest economy by the turn of the decade. It is growing at 7.7% in a world where most large economies are growing at 1 or 2. It is attracting close to $100 billion of foreign investment every year. It has a space program that landed on the moon's south pole before anyone else. It has a pharmaceutical industry that supplies 40% of the world's generic medicines. It has a digital payment infrastructure that processes more transactions per day than most of Europe's combined. And now, in June 2026, it has a currency arrangement that reduces its exposure to dollar-based coercion. The world has been told for years that India is a rising power. The phrase implies movement toward a destination not yet reached. But look at what India did in 1 week in June 2026. A rising power does not do these things in 1 week. A power that has already risen does. There are people who will say it is too early, that India has too many internal challenges, that infrastructure gaps remain, that poverty has not been fully eliminated, that governance challenges persist. These people are not wrong about the existence of those challenges. They are wrong about the trajectory. A country with challenges that is moving at this speed in this many directions simultaneously is a country that is solving its challenges, not a country that is defined by them. None of this happened because the world just favored India. None of it came from aid or from charity or from permission granted by a more powerful country. Every piece of it was earned. Every capability was built. Every relationship was cultivated. Every agreement was negotiated from a position of increasing strength. This is the India of 2026, moving faster than anyone predicted, building more than anyone expected, earning a position in the world that 1.5 billion people have waited generations to see. The world is watching, some with admiration, some with concern, some with calculation, but everyone is watching. So thank you for watching this video through to the end. It means everything. If this video made you proud, share it. That is how this channel grows. Like, subscribe, and we will see you in the next one.